And you got shorted again?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you guys just look on? Yeah, why don't you look on right now? So what I want to do with this thing, so do I got 19? I think I did 18 copies. I've got to recheck my roster right now. Once in a while I try to be... What's that? And is anybody gone, or is this the full load? Oh yeah, Chris is gone. And Riley. And Michael. How big's our class? We must have 20... Would you count?
Got 18 right now.
Huh. All right, so guess there's a few more of you then. I don't know why that was in my mind. Okay. All right, well, I'll do a little better with my printouts here. So I'm going to be this interviewer, and this is a pretty interesting exchange between Wayne when he was just leaving the Federal Reserve. This was 1994. And some of the details of the Fed. I think it gives us some of the insights into what all was going on. So I'm going to go round robin around the room with the different paragraphs when Wayne speaks. I want you guys to read it out aloud. So I won't have you read the whole thing because some responses are larger than others. I will always be the region guy asking the question. And let's just start with Corbin once I get to there. So you'll read the first paragraph, and then I guess we'll, maybe you guys can kind of figure it out on your own. We'll let the market play out, but Alyssa, Mallory, whatever. And we'll just kind of snake through to Michael, then Gene, work our way up here, then to Colby, and then work back. Okay? And then we'll just kind of go round robin like that. All right, so during your Senate confirmation hearings back in January of 1986, Senator Dole said that he wanted agricultural interests represented on the Board of Governors, and he felt that would be accomplished by your appointment. Did you take that as a key responsibility of yours during your tenure?
Yes, particularly in the first years when I was appointed, the agricultural regions of the country were in very serious difficulty, almost depression-like. It wasn't as long-lasting as some other depressions, but it really was very severe. Consequently, I was very careful to give some priorities to banking groups in states such as Iowa, where they were hit the hardest. I made some trips to Iowa and surrounding states because I wanted the agriculture community to feel that they had a voice, and I wanted to sell them on my mission. I suppose one of the most interesting things to me was that they were very ready to be sold.
The story that I told basically was that the inflation that the Fed promulgated. What's that mean?
Initiated, kind of started.
During the 1960s and 1970s is what drove up those land values, and that the high land prices are not in the interest of farmers. The American Farm Bureau was a group that in many cases I worked with, and they understood what I had to say.
I remember when Schumann of the American Farm Bureau came into Paul Volcker's office with me and their Washington representative discussing the relationship between third world debt and falling land values and falling commodity prices in Iowa and Tennessee.
At that point in time, I think Paul Volcker saw that monetary policy was causing commodity prices to fall, and that if actual deflation of commodity prices continued, it was going to disrupt not only the domestic banking system, it was going to disrupt international banks as well, because many of our large money center banks would not be able to survive if we had cessation of payments on all third world debt. I think Paul Volcker saw that day that third world debt is very closely related to commodity prices. And I think that was part of the moving together that Paul Volcker and I did in those early months. So this agricultural background that led to my appointment was a responsibility that I took seriously.
Would you say it was consistent value of yours all the way through your term to be a champion of agricultural issues here at the board?
I've always been ready to do what I think needs to be done in that regard. But in the latter 4 years of my term, the pain had shifted to other regions, and we began to get some recovery in land values. A new, quiet, strong prosperity began to emerge in agriculture. Then the message was, don't ever inflate again.
In the same confirmation hearings, you said, I pledge to this committee and I pledge to the American people that in my time on the Federal Reserve Board, I will be ever watchful for any reemergence of inflation. I consider it the primary responsibility of monetary authorities to preserve the value of the dollar, and that is my pledge. Looking back to that day, can you say that the pledge was met?
I think that there has been other voices on the board and on the FOMC that have wanted this priority, and the chairman has certainly enunciated the priority of the Humphrey Hopkins testimonies. Out of that, I get some satisfaction in terms of this obligation. Okay.
I was somewhat more explicit with the group of consumer advocates that came down to Howard University from Boston. In this meeting of inner-city community groups reminded me somewhat of meetings with farmers when they were in turmoil. I tried to explain to the group why price levelability was a populist program, that is, why people benefit. I suggested that if we were successful, that 30-year mortgage rates would go down to 7%, and I said that will be the test. You can tell whether we succeed or not. So yes, I do feel some satisfaction about the progress made by the Volcker and Greenspan Fed during the Volcker-Greenspan era in achieving as much of this objective as we have.
You must feel good about your role in accomplishing that.
I don't feel comfortable evaluating my own role. I just tried to be a voice on a 7-member board on a 12-member voting FOMC with 19 people expressing views. I've always felt that you must make certain that every perspective is heard.
In your early days on the Board of Governors, the press put you with Preston Martin, Martha Seeger, and Manny Johnson, dubbing you the group of the Gang of Four. Some expected that as Reagan appointees, you might become a conservative coalition within the system. Was there ever truly a Gang of Four or a gang of any sort?
There was never a gang of four. It was very unusual for two of us to be appointed at the same time. It was even more unusual about the background relationship that Manley Johnson and I had that became very quickly a close personal relationship of trust.
I received a telephone call from Professor James Courtney of Florida State University in mid-October 1985, and he said, "A very unusual thing has happened to me. The President of the United States has announced that he is appointing my professor to the Board of Governors, and he has announced that he is appointing one of the students of the Board of Governors."
Courtney, who was a student of mine, became very active in politics in Kansas in addition to studying economics. So Courtney and Manley Johnson and I shared a common theme, which meant that Manley Johnson and I felt very closely associated in regard to the way that we viewed microeconomics and macroeconomics. Both of us fit into what some would call supply-siders. Even though I didn't call myself a supply-sider, others called me one because of my emphasis upon price stability and also on the economic growth. The group that says you can have your cake and eat it too. As a result of that, a very close relationship developed between Manley Johnson and myself.
The so-called Gang of Four didn't come together other than that at that moment in time, the four of us wanted the same policy results. If you will recall the Business Week article that mentioned a Gang of Four, it gave its own epitaph to the gang, saying that after all, it's the FOMC that determines monetary policy, and so the four would not be effective even though they were the majority.
I had voted for discount rate cuts, that is, for proposing a discount rate cut at the board meetings of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City in November and December of 1985. Recognizing the serious commodity price deflation that was underway, I was quite certain that our economy would be on the jagged edge in regard to economic growth if that deflation continued. I was quite clearly in the camp of stopping that commodity price deflation, but I wasn't as comfortable with some others with whom I was temporarily aligned regarding their full commitment against inflation. I did not want to be part of anything that would cause Paul Volcker to resign, and yet I had made the motion in the boardroom to cut the rate. We knew the vote would be decisive. We also knew that if we voted the discount rate down with the reserve targeting era that was in place, there would be no question but that the Fed rates would decline. So this vote had a kind of historic proportion to it because the FOMC had just voted to maintain reserve pressures.
I don't want to overstate this because I have high regard for the FOMC arrangements that provide stability and provide continuity in regard to political change. And I wouldn't want to do anything that would diminish the long-term role of the FOMC and the President. But if you have members of the board who are indeed somewhat bold and somewhat confident in regard to what they're doing, who wish to take action, then I think it's appropriate that the Federal Reserve System accommodate itself to that wish. Because in the discussions that Manley and I had before the vote, we clearly
back to the game of force speculation, it worked out just about like Manley and I were confident it would work. I had a great deal of respect for what Paul Volcker had done in 1979 and what he continued to do in 1981 and 1982. I always believed that he helped by having a president who really said that this is my agenda too. But I had a lot of respect for Paul Volcker, and I knew that his mission, in a sense, was my mission. So it was not surprising that Paul called me into his office before that vote was announced. You see, we put the action off for 10 days to enable Japan and Germany to cut their rates on the same day, which satisfied all of our objectives. It satisfied Volcker's and it satisfied mine and Manuel Johnson's. because we wanted to stop a worldwide commodity recession.
Now, the interesting thing about that was that as new members of the board, Manley and I knew the ultimate test is whether we are right or whether we are wrong. If two new members of the board come in here and do this, it is subsequently we are deemed to have been wrong. We might as well pack our bags and go home. It was a bold step that we were willing to take.
Okay, I want to pause there and have some discussion now. Okay, let me just open the floor to you guys. Opening comments, questions? Okay, so who's Paul Volcker? Paul Volcker, and I was kicking myself after we started this that I forgot to bring my picture that I did last time. That was the tall guy. Yeah, the tall guy in the picture. The short guy in the picture was Wayne Angell. And so Paul Volcker was the chair of the Fed. And let me fill in a little bit of background on Volcker of what Angell's referring to here in this paragraph. So the 1970s were expansive monetary policy of never before seen proportions. And people like Milton Friedman were saying that there was going to be inflation coming. And sure enough, inflation kicked in during the 1970s in a big, big way. And we were starting to see double-digit inflation, which we'd never seen in the United States. And so Paul Volcker took the chair of the Federal Reserve position, and he clamped down on the money supply. And so it was really his efforts there to impose a severe monetary contraction to kind of shock the United States back into getting inflation down to a more manageable level. And what it did was drive the economy into recession. So a lot of that early 80s, 1984, 83, 84 recession was due to the actions of Volcker with inflation. And he wasn't a popular guy at the time because politicians and the general public, they were just feeling the recession. Now, at the same time, they were feeling the inflation running at 10% too. And so things were kind of weird when you went for a mortgage for your house and you were facing 18% inflation. I'm sorry, 18% interest rate because of the inflation that was in the economy. So from that respect, he garnered respect. And I think people kind of knew that that was maybe the right thing to do, but it's not going to feel good. And there might have been different ways to approach deflating the economy. And he took a very aggressive way. And he just said, that's it. We're gonna pull it in and just let things fall. Let the economy go into recession so that we can bring down the price level and get it back to a more stable level. So that's part of what Angell was referring to in this article about whether Volcker would resign. Why? Now that I've given you that backdrop, why was Angell concerned about him resigning or whether it was the right thing to do? What was Angell suggesting the board do now in 1985, 86? It's actually right when the first meeting is what, that kind of came out a little bit here. It says early on. But when Wayne Angell talked a couple years ago, he said it was the very first meeting that he jumped in and kind of made some comments that rocked the boat in the room when you've got Paul Volcker, who was kind of thought to be the champion of bringing inflation down. And then here comes little Wayne Angell. He's only about 5'1". It's funny, I mean, because he's just a little guy and he's got this big stature, but he's just a little guy. And he comes in and rocks the boat. So what did he do with the early meeting? Why was he concerned about Volcker possibly resigning? What did he suggest doing?
They were like trying to stop.
Lower the discount rate. Sorry, go ahead, Reno.
Then later when they have to try to stop commodity deflation.
Yeah, so he was concerned about the commodity prices, and he identified that as an issue. And he was the first one to identify commodity prices as a potential thing to be mindful of. And at this time, there was the farm crisis, too. Farmers were in tough times. There was the John Cougar Mellencamp, and some had the Farm Aid. It was called Farm Aid, and it was raising money for the farmers because that's how many farmers were going under, that were losing their long-time family farms because of the state of the economy with inflation and commodity prices. And so this was a big deal at the time. And so is a decrease in the discount rate expansionary or contractionary in terms of monetary policy? A decrease in the discount rate. It's expansionary, so it's decreasing interest rates. So here we just came off of the most unbelievable history of inflation in the United States. We just zapped it. Really just came out of 2 years of zapping it. Came out of the recession. The economy's starting to recover. Reagan, pro-growth, all of that type of stuff. And then if the Fed pursues an expansionary policy by cutting the discount rate, what is that saying? Is that something that would be easily accepted? Is that the right time to pursue expansionary monetary policy? What's the connection with expansionary monetary policy and inflation? Kate, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you got a thought.
No, I don't see why it wouldn't be the right thing if you're coming out of recession. Wouldn't you want to go into an expansionary period? If the trend is already going up, the rule of thumb might not be you need to add more fuel to the fire. So expansionary policy is often a policy that you tend to do if the economy was kind of flat or shrinking, and we need to kind of spike up the economy. So if we think about the business cycle with real GDP, we're trying to make our growth more stable with less swings. And so as the economy is starting to go in recession, we might tend to inject more money to kind of ride it out and flatten the hills and the peaks, and to bottom out the valleys and just make the economy grow like that. So it's kind of a counter policy to try to maintain growth at a stable level.
So you're saying they did that maybe a few years too late?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily the timing of when they're doing it. You mean because of the commodity price deflation?
No, just because wouldn't they have done it when we were starting to go into the recession?
Oh, well, okay. We'll talk more about this when we get to the policy chapter, but there was other things going on that caused the inflation to begin with. So it was expansionary monetary policy that caused the inflation in the first place. So then Paul Volcker deflates us, does a severe contraction, we fall, now it's 1984, 85, 86, and the economy is starting to come back, things are starting to look like normal, and now we've got the Federal Reserve doing some sort of expansion.
I was thinking maybe the public wouldn't take kindly to the government interfering when it should be kind of hands-off during expansion.
And during this time, the hands-off thing was kind of a big deal because we saw what hands-on did during the 1970s. And for the first time, people realized that maybe the government doesn't know exactly what they're doing with this stuff, and that it can cause that we can get to a point where there's 10, 12% inflation, that maybe this isn't the right thing to be kind of meddling with the economy. And now we're right back in the saddle. This Wayne Angel guy, little guy from Kansas, is saying that we should inflate. We should increase the money supply when we're just came out of this crazy period and now we're here. So that's what made it controversial, is to pursue that. And so what Wayne had to do was to sell them on this commodity price deflation, and that this is a sign that worldwide we could have issues with commodities. And so one area, he's looking out for the agricultural interests, right? So that's part of it. But he also believed that that's a sign of weakness for the economy in general, that we might be starting to slip. Okay. Any other last comments on that little part? So on the front side, does anybody recognize the Jim Courtney guy there? He is an Ottawa University graduate. He was a student of Wayne Angel at Ottawa University when Wayne Angel was a professor at Ottawa University. So Wayne Angel was here. He went to KU in the late 50s and came back started teaching economics here at Ottawa in like 1958 or 56, somewhere in the late 50s. And then he was basically a professor here and did, dean's positions, all kinds of stuff at the university, all the way up until he was appointed to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in 1985. And so one of those students along the way was Jim Courtney. And I've mentioned his name before in other classes. He's the one that puts together the Economic Freedom Index of the world. He worked with Milton Friedman. He himself was very influential in different ways on looking at what are the keys to economic growth. And he was a student of Wayne's here. And then this Manny Johnson, they call him Manny is his nickname, but Lee Johnson, was a student of Jim's at Florida State when he was there. And so that was the unusual thing, is that here is a guy that has a connection. My professor and my student are going to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which we all are starting to maybe appreciate what a unique thing that is. And they were 2 of the 4 that Reagan got to appoint. So that was the other interesting point of contention here about this gang of 4 that they're bringing up, is that was in the papers quite a bit of a big deal, that we have, what was the thing about the terms that I talked about last time? How long of a term does each governor serve? 14 years. And how are they set up? Staggered, yeah. And the idea is so that no one president can appoint too many people. It just so happened they do resign from it. In fact, most resign before their 14 years is up. And so in this time period, there happened to be 4 openings coming up. And so Reagan got to appoint all 4 of these guys. And 2 of them were the Manly Johnson and Wayne Angel. So that's kind of a little interesting Ottawa insight there. Okay, other questions, comments on it? So, Ottawa's turned out to be kind of an influential place that I didn't know, by the way, before I came here, that's a pretty cool thing that I learned after coming here. So it's not like general economic knowledge, I went to Iowa State, and it's not like everybody knows Wayne Angel, but once you start to learn the story, he really was a big time player. I also learned from him through my discussions with him, and I think it's mentioned maybe some other times in the paper, but he used to play tennis with Alan Greenspan. That was his tennis buddy. So he regularly played tennis in Washington, D.C., like multiple times a week with Alan Greenspan. There was a tennis court on the top of the condo or somewhere near the I think it was the athletic club in Washington, D.C. What's that? Who does?
Wayne.
Oh, Wayne does? Is that right? So, yeah, he still has his condo that is in Washington, D.C. that is near where he lived during his time on the board. So,
What year was
Angel was appointed in 85, but he started in 86, I think. So sometimes things reference 1985 and others 86. All right, have a good weekend. So you can start your preparation for your presentations on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then we'll continue this on Monday.
Do you have another article